sought information for a living. That is to say that ever since he returned from Korea, after having served with the armed forces, he had been working as a private and had gotten in touch with him regarding a simple vandalism issue. Nothing to write home about. Not worth hiring a private eye either, just so he can drive for hours on rough roads. But that's how it had always been. The client pays, Carl gets it done. They had set up to meet at the general store, his client's business. Well, actually, the entire village had William Hamilton's name written all over it. When the roads were bad, muddy, or snowed in, it was customary around these parts to close them off. But it was also customary to ignore those signs entirely and drive there anyway. Hamilton never mentioned a road-blocking barrier. Why was it needed here in the back of Beyond? That would, however, be a mystery for another day. Carl had waited long enough for someone to come and raise it. Still not a soul in sight. There was no point in waiting any longer. Carl had to figure this one out by himself. Hamilton is waiting for Carl in the general store. It was time for him to get down to business. William Hamilton enjoyed a lavish country house built in the very heart of the northern forests, not too far from here. The local populace was divided when it came to the affluent man. Some saw a wealthy philanthropist dedicated to improving the region's economy. Others an aging Englishman who would do anything to further his fortunes. And those ones hated him enough to go on about scheming against him. Hamilton had recently acquired a few local businesses, but the last straw was the reopening of a mine, which gave rise to a wave of protests and threats from the Cree people. Given these circumstances, Carl reckoned that a good number of people must be feeling compelled to oppose Hamilton in one way or another. So far, only the industrialist's house had been a target, but soon enough, Carl thought, the target would become the man himself. Carl needed to get out of there. The cold and the pain required urgent care. The driver had taken off. It was still best to check it out and leave nothing to chance. Carl needed help. It was a small, locked box engraved with the letters WH. Carl thought about taking it. Nothing was to be left to chance. Scratches did not stop Carl. His mother would be so proud. Carl wondered how long he would have to endure this skin-stinging cold. Even better than he had hoped. Carl Faubert had succeeded once more, and was now on his way to new adventures. More materials were needed to stir up the flames. Cold turned into pain. Carl needed to find someplace warm. Spread out on a few acres of untouched forest, bellowing caribou, everlasting snow, and undefiled lakes. The Manistan region was no tourist hub. It was said to have been populated for millennia by Cree people, and ever since the industrial era, by the metal mining industry. The truck was running on fumes. Good thing that the general store was close by. Wouldn't surrender their divine nectar so easily. In all likelihood, they had to be switched on from inside the store. Carl had no trouble recognizing his employer. He had been killed. There was no need to be a detective to figure that out. But only a detective could have noticed that the killer had to have been very close, that the fatal blow had been given before the victim even realized. What could be inside that envelope? Carl was taken aback. He knew this address. It was said to be the address of the P.O. box for the Canadian Secret Service. Carl felt a chill down his spine and had a terrifying realization. If Hamilton was dead, then who was going to pay him? An explosion suddenly occurred outside. Carl knew that Gilles Lachance was in charge of the general store. That made him one of Hamilton's employees. A very angry employee, as Carl could plainly see. According to that log, it seemed like the whole village owed some money to the general store. Carl was far more interested in the bunch of nearby addresses he had just gotten his hands on, though. The note explained that the garage and the store couldn't be supplied with electricity at the same time. Carl was used to strange phenomena, but a chunk of ice like this, as if an iceberg came out of the ground, that was a first. Prints? Carl found a surprise at every turn. Was the camera faulty, or was it a possible lead? Carl was no electrician, but he could identify a wiring problem when he saw one. Hate was in the air. Seems like some villagers barely tolerated each other. Staring intently at the controls won't be enough to make that lift budge. The poor thing was out of power. At long last, the crowbar was within Carl's grasp. Surely it would come in handy at some point. The note explained that the garage and the store couldn't be supplied with electricity at the same time. The snowstorm pummeled everything in its path. Carl was not surprised when he heard no tone. Carl knew straight away where to find the infuriated Gilles Lachance. Any good investigation would have to start there. Carl was beginning to know the store and its surroundings like the back of his hand. The seeker had sought. The Polaroid, Carl's long-standing and faithful ally, had seen its share of husbands caught red-handed cheating. There's always something out there waiting to be snapped away. Carl wondered what the hell could that thing be. It looked like a man fossilized in ice. All of a sudden, Carl felt like he was pulled inside a world of dreams, a cold, unknown dimension. Somehow, self-control was slipping from his grasp. To all appearances, this was a hunting log. Better yet, a war diary. What could these engraved numbers mean? A fresh path suddenly appeared before Carl. Carl had that feeling you get when you immerse your frozen hands in hot water. What happened? Now at least he knew who the unfortunate man petrified in ice was. Gilles Lachance, the general store's manager himself. That had to be the worst parking job ever. Who was Carl to judge, though? It may be customary to park like that around these parts, or not. A milkman had to drive by every week to fill the bottles. The fresh milk indicated a recent visit. Something fell to the bottom of the box. The murder weapon. What was that doing there, Carl wondered. Hamilton must have been determined to keep some information secret to post this key. Shame he got unlucky. Everything made sense now. Poor Hamilton's denunciation was interrupted, and he figured it would be best to lock everything up and send the key to his correspondent, who would receive the box later on. Clever, but not enough. That's what happens to ordinary people playing spy. There should be a law forbidding doctors from falling sick. Finding a locked door in the country is not that big of a deal. Carl knew a key had to be hidden nearby. In spite of Dr. Beaupre's goodwill, the place didn't look much like a physician's office. It could easily be mistaken for a sewing shop. For the one-eyed, or for other vision problems, the eye patch was the way to go. Carl got the trembles as he imagined the excruciating pain that kind of scalpel could no doubt inflict. Within these miserable walls, patients probably felt more like in a slaughterhouse than in a doctor's office. Someone had lost a few liters of blood here. Carl's first thought had been a lumber accident, someone's hand cut by a saw, or a hunting accident. In any case, whoever had lost all this blood couldn't have gone far. Perhaps they were already dead. Someone had lost a few liters of blood here. Carl's first thought had been a lumber accident, someone's hand cut by a saw, or a hunting accident. In any case, whoever had lost all this blood couldn't have gone far. Perhaps they were already dead. The good doctor, flanked by his beautiful spouse. Pure happiness, captured on cardstock. Carl recognized this woman's soulful eyes. Was it Dr. Beaupre who had hit him head-on at the village border? Doctors used light-reflecting frontal mirrors to look inside the patient's cavities. That was a bit unsettling, but back then, it was pretty much always the case with medicine. A communist manifesto. Only a few years ago, this type of allegiance meant prison time. And even at present, the Western world was very wary of the Soviet threat. Why would the doctor own such a book? Nobody kills a rich patient to start a revolution. It didn't make any sense. He had to dig deeper still to understand. Luckily, that was Carl Faubert's specialty. A chamber pot. Fortunately for Carl, inspecting it wouldn't further this particular investigation. Great care had to be taken searching this place full of oddities. Everything was important. The decor itself told a story.
Bravo, mon bonhomme. Tu fais là, l'étrange. Je m'attendais pas à ce qu'un étrange retontisse par ici. Moi te dire, je prends plus de chance depuis que ça rôde dans ce bout-là. J'ai ma carabine au bout du doigt, et puis bang, 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 si ça s'approche. Si tu veux du linge chaud, parce que t'es habillé comme un gars de la ville, je dirais pas non à une bonne bouteille de caribou. Puis tu pigeras ce que tu voudras parmi mes guenilles. Tu marches, tu marches, tu marches, tu sens des pieds. Dans mon temps, c'était comme sur l'image. On était vrais, fiers, forts, puis on avait le bon lieu de notre bord. Vois-tu le livre, là? C'est le Wendigo. Ouais, le Wendigo. Un guerrier qui devient un loup pour se venger de sa grosse peine. Et... vois que t'as pas mieux à faire. Gomme-moi la belle rose de la tulipe, qui se donne au yob sur le mercredi des cendres. C'est-tu pas effrayant, cette histoire-là? Hé, la Corriveau, Batèche, ça te passe l'envie de te marier, la Corriveau? À tuer tous ses maris, squick, les uns après les autres. Pas de pitié dans le mariage. Oyez, 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 il y a un petit gars d'écarté dans ma maison. C'est encore beau. Tout ce qui est vieilli est bien meilleur. C'est vrai, le jeune, que tu te promènes quasiment en bobette. Une bonne police, ça te fera pas de tort. Mais je vais te dire une chose, dans ton coin de pays comme par ici, on n'a rien sans rien. Et où, mon caribou? Cadeau, ça ouvre la pantille. Prends-la, je m'en fous. Perds ton temps dans mes déchets tant que tu rapportes le caribou.
Not too shabby. Carl felt he needed to protect himself. Carl, like many of his contemporaries, felt like he had more trouble breathing when he wasn't smoking. Cigarette was his own personal breathing assistant. There, Carl had fed his mind, but had forgotten the harsh reality that his body also needed nourishment, especially in the dead of winter. Sometimes, and especially around here, people are so possessive with their land, as a dog is with hydrants. Another worrisome victim of this ice, this one seemingly petrified in action. The poor man, before being frozen solid, seemed to have been defending the entrance to his cabin. But from what? something very important must have been in there for the man to take such time and effort to hide it. But Carl didn't know how to reach it. The week of October 5th, thought Carl. That was this week. The plug should have been here by now. The very first steps of man on the moon were made more than a year ago. The event had surely captivated the mechanic's mind for him to still keep this around. Carl had a hunch that there had got to be a plan somewhere that could help him put this thing back together. Weird stuff. Kind of a crossing between a colander and a hairdryer. What was it for? To play telepath? To protect against nuclear waves? The man has a passion for intergalactic things. Back then, people were obviously scared of the Russian atomic bomb, but an invasion by extraterrestrials was a legit fear as well. Seems like the mechanic had made his choice. Roswell, Atamipek, same story. Large deserts conducive to extravagant follies. Carl deducted this was a map of the area. Were those pins pointing to places of interest? These scribblings were undoubtedly the mark of a tormented mind. Something wasn't right in the poor mechanic's head. If some daring person could manage to get their hands on the missing parts, Carl was willing to bet that the craft would have taken flight. Nice catio. They say it's supposed to soothe the soul. But with this powerful gale that seemingly never sleeps, it was far more likely to get on anyone's nerves. The milk was sorted by color, from the whitest to the greenest, or in other words, from the freshest to the sourest. Perhaps someone was expecting an important call. In any case, that person's in for a long wait. Carl already noticed that telephone services weren't provided in this area. By following the plan, Carl was led to believe that the snowmobile's parts had to be scattered about in the vicinity. It was so cold. Already Carl did not feel his toes anymore. Carl hadn't lived up to his good finder reputation. He still hadn't found any of the wealth contained in Lamotte's lands.
m'amènes un bon galon de caribou, puis on devient amis. Sinon, mon petit gars, tu sors avant que je te sorte. D'apparence que mon caribou tarde. Tu marches, tu marches, tu marches, tu sens des pieds.
Carl, ever diligent in his work, always carried his log on him, in which he scribbled down thoughts and leads alike during the course of his investigations.